Okay, so I'm just going to go through rendering in Revit and then maybe making some adjustments to the rendering using Photoshop. And so here you can see I've got a perspective that I've already set up with the textures and the lighting. And notice I've got it on realistic display. And I might also turn shadows on. And so just with that, that realistic shaded display, I can see the textures and including the decals. And then obviously with the shadows, I can see the sun direction. And those things are going to have a big impact on the render. So we want to make sure all those things are set up. And particularly with the textures, it often is helpful if you're looking for realistic looking renders to have the textures visible. In other words, if it's a photographic texture, you'd want it to be clear in this realistic view. I'll just zoom in a bit there so you can see that this is a photograph of some timber. And if you can't see the texture clearly here, you're not going to see it when you render. And with rendering, a lot of it is still an illusion. I know they look real, a lot of them, but you really are using photographic images as textures to create that illusion of reality. And so a lot of the realism does come from the textures, and the render settings are a bonus. But again, you need to have that initial realism set up with textures. And then you can see here I've got the render settings already set up in this render dialog box, so just make sure you know about the teapot to bring that up. And so when you're testing, you obviously want to start with low quality so it renders faster, and it'll be on screen initially. And so I just want to make it clear there that the resolution also affects the quality. So the setting at the top is called quality, but output settings controls your resolution, and that has a big impact on the quality of the render as well. And so with screen set for the resolution, it picks up the size of that perspective view on the screen. And so you can see there as I zoom, these numbers are changing. If I zoom back in, those numbers are going to get bigger. And so it's really a test setting when you've got it on screen, so that you can quickly have a pixel size there, which is essentially setting the resolution, and I'll come back to that in a second. And it's usually going to be a fairly low setting because the number of pixels on the screen is going to be less than the pixels you'll need when you render for print. And so again, with the test render settings, I can go to draft or low and render fairly quickly. Then when I'm happy with that result, I can improve the quality. So, well, maybe I'll just quickly do this on draft. I'm sure you've seen it plenty of times. It'll render in maybe a minute or so. I've rendered this on high with 300 dpi already, and it was about 15 or 20 minutes. Which is fast. I mean, in days gone by, it was normal to have even fairly low quality renders take hours, and then for billboards and things like that, which have really, really big pixel dimensions, it'd take days. And even I've seen renders, we've had renders for billboards take a couple of weeks back in the 90s. That was not unusual. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's still faster than drawing it, because when things were drawn at very high quality, it did take days, and the man hours were just ridiculous. So going to a higher quality there, so I might just go to medium. It's going to be too long otherwise. It's going to take longer, but you'll see it's going to improve the quality in ways other than by changing the resolution. And so what it's doing is improving things like the aliasing. So aliasing is when you have, for example, jaggy lines that you see often in perspectives, because the lines that are parallel tend to converge, and when that isn't calculated accurately, those converging lines turn into stepped lines, and you can get that strobing sort of effect as well, which is a related thing. Again, often with parallel lines, you see that. So as the quality's improved, these things that appeared a bit pixelated, it wasn't actually pixelation, it was the aliasing that was giving those lines that looked a bit jagged. And also, again, especially where you've got parallel lines, you see that effect a lot. But then it's also increasing the lighting calculations for things like shadows and bounced lighting. So that when the light comes in from the sun through the windows, it hits these areas where you can see it's brightly lit on the floor, and then it has to bounce into the rest of the space. Otherwise you wouldn't see anything. I mean, I've got some artificial lights that are giving some extra light in there, but a lot of the light that you can see coming off those other walls and the ceiling is from the sun bouncing off the floor, and so that's a setting that needs to be increased to get higher quality renders. And so, like I said, I've rendered this with a higher quality, and I'll show you that in a moment. So you can obviously increase the quality there to improve those settings, and I'll just go to edit to show you what they are. So here you can see aliasing or anti-aliasing is one of the settings that gets improved, and the so reflections and refractions. So when you have lots of transparent materials, you need fairly high quality settings for the light to pass through all of those transparent materials, especially when they're in series. So if you've got a series of windows or other transparent materials, or if you have multiple reflections, so if you have a series of mirrors or even just other reflective surfaces, these settings need to be fairly high. So these are done in a fairly automatic way when you use the presets, but you can go to custom if you want to adjust them individually. And then you have, again, shadows, increased quality, and these are all the settings for the bouncing of the light. It's still fairly limited compared to what a professional rendering program like Mental Ray in 3ds Max will give you. This is Mental Ray, but it's Mental Ray stripped back to the bare minimum settings. And you can still get very good results though, because Mental Ray is the engine used for a lot of high quality work. Fairly sure I think they still use it for Transformers and a lot of other film production. Is all done with Mental Ray, and it's definitely a very capable engine, but there are others that maybe give you more flexibility, like V-Ray and Final Render and so on. Atom, I think is another one. There's a ton of them anyway. But again, Mental Ray is the one you have with Revit, and fairly popular engine. So, so before I go and show you the render, the other thing to look at is the resolution. So on screen, it's fairly arbitrary, it's what you see on the screen. But when you go to printer, then you've got these options for dots per inch. So if you go to 75 dpi, it's going to give you probably lower pixel dimensions than you have with screen. But not necessarily, it all comes back to the size that you have for that perspective. And so if you remember to set the size of a perspective view, you don't have a scale, you need to select the border and then go to size crop. And then you see the width and the height in millimeters. And so if you go to scale instead of field of view, you can change those values without changing the view. So if I make the height there 200, the width is going to change in proportion. If you leave it on field of view, you can change them separately, which is going to affect the view, because you're essentially stretching out one side or the other. So usually, if you're just changing it for the rendering, you want to make sure you on scale lock proportions there and then change whichever value you want to there. So I'll click OK. It's going to change on the screen But if I zoom out, you'll see that the view is exactly the same. What's inside that border is exactly the same as what was there before. But then the pixel dimensions here have doubled in each direction. So if I go back to size crop and change it again with scale lock proportions back to 100 for the height, and the width will go to half again, click OK, and then the pixel dimensions of half. So it's the pixel dimensions that give you the resolution. So higher pixel dimensions equal a higher resolution. But also you can increase the resolution setting here, and this is where it's a bit confusing if you're not totally au fait with image size versus resolution. But anyhow, you'll see if I increase the DPI there to 150, that will also double the pixel count in each direction. And again to 300, it'll double it again. So there I've got, let's say roughly 1600 by 1100 pixels in total in each direction. And that would achieve a resolution of 300 dpi with these image dimensions, width and height of 137 by 100 mil in millimetres. I'll show you how you can work that out in Photoshop as well in a second. So I'll close this and I'll show you the one that I've saved. So it's down here. Okay, so that's the rendering done at 300 dpi with those pixel dimensions, or with that image dimension. And I've exported it, so whenever you render, going back to here, if it's a render that's good enough quality for you to use and you want to make sure you keep a copy of it, it's good to use save to project, and that'll save a copy. I'll just put the rendering up again. So save to project, and that'll let you save a copy within Revit that goes into the rendering category down here. But then export will export a copy, and so, now actually I'm a bit silly. I exported a JPEG before. I meant to export a PNG. So while I'm talking, I'm just going to set that rendering again. I'll work with the JPEG for the time being, and then I'll have the PNG to work with afterwards. So the JPEG, if you go back to it, will be basically the same as what you get when you save it within Revit. TIFFs are a good option as well, but TIFFs are big, and usually these days you're not going to notice much of a difference. So if I go and find that file here, it was upstairs 1. Okay, so you can see it basically looks the same as what I'd saved in Revit. I'll show you in a moment when I open the PNG file, so that'll just take a little while. Might actually do that on medium, it's going to take too long otherwise. PNG gives you different options to JPEGs, and it's fine actually, because you can use the JPEG as your initial layer and then replace it with the PNG afterwards. So with the JPEG you don't get any channels, and that's one of the disadvantages of the JPEG format. It doesn't give you an alpha channel, whereas the PNG will. But we can still look at doing basic things like the adjustments. So a lot of these adjustments you can do at any stage. So make sure you know with Photoshop on the image menu, and then under adjustments you've got all of these basic adjustments that you can do with virtually any image. And you can, like I said, do these at any time except for some like HDR toning. So HDR toning is an interesting one. If you try it with the layers, or if you've added layers afterwards, then it's going to ask you to flatten the image. So it's good to do this one at the beginning if you're going to use it. And it works in a similar way to the exposure options that you have in Revit, but it'll do a little bit more. So you've got here this radius setting, which is basically going to affect the edges. So often you want to take that down if you want to preserve the detail. But it does give you a bit of depth if you have some sort of, so it's your edge glow, sorry, that you're affecting there with the radius. Then you have the tone, which is really the exposure control. So with gamma, it balances out in essentially the opposite way to what exposure does. So exposure is your overall brightness control, and gamma works the other way. So here you can use gamma, and notice it's brightening up those areas that become darker without affecting the bright areas. And then detail essentially controls the graininess. So you can see there, as I take it to the left, the texture is being lost, and then if I go to the right, it'll emphasise the texture, I suppose. So we don't go too far with that, but again, it can be good to pick up the texture a bit more. And then you have the controls at the bottom, which affect the colours mainly. So you've got the vibrance, which is affecting the, well, never quite know what these, they're both a way of controlling the saturation essentially. So this is your direct saturation control. And saturation, if you're not sure, is the amount of colour. But then the vibrance works in a similar way. So notice as you go to the left, it will take it to be basically similar to a grayscale, but it does still have those colours in there. So it's an unusual one, but it definitely is worth looking at. And then you also have shadow and highlight control. So again, if you've got the sun too bright, you can use the highlight control to reduce that, and then the shadows controls the areas obviously in shadow. So if you compare that before, you can see it just can add a lot of definition to renders that otherwise might be a bit flat. Again, notice it's very warm now. It's mainly sunlit, this space, and that's a warm light. So I'm going to go to adjustments again and use the photo filter. Photo filter. Oh, you don't need to use it. Adjustment layers are really unnecessary if you're going to go backwards and forwards, and you don't need to. They're overused, and adjustment layers actually work slightly differently to the direct controls. So I don't need to worry about adjustment layers if you need to use them, but you don't always need to. So they're really overused. A lot of people just use them automatically and don't realise that they do work differently to the direct adjustments as well. So here the cooling filters will reduce that warmth. You can also do direct colours, but at first it's probably easiest just to use the presets. So then, sorry? Oh, photo filter? Yeah. Yeah, and you've got an adjustment layer for that as well, but yeah, photo filter on the adjustments menu. So then, it's good to try a lot of the others. So brightness contrast is a good one, but then for rendered images, it's often a good idea to try exposure as well. So it works differently to the way it does with the HDR toning. So here you can see that's going to make it brighter, but these areas are maybe too bright, so I can try the gamma correction and maybe correct for that. And offset as well sometimes is a good one.
What exactly is the difference between using these and adjustments, and what are they?
Oh, they do give a slightly different effect with adjustments, so you can go backwards and forwards. So, oh, it just gives a different look. Yeah, just because the. It is, it is. Yeah, so with the...
Yes, I use a lot of adjustment layers. I never use adjustment.
Oh, yeah, no, well, you can always go back to the original and see what... Okay, if you're worried about that, just do a copy of the layer. So you can just copy and then turn the background off and just work on the layer on top. And so adjustment layers work on all the layers as well that are below the adjustment layer. And so when you build up a lot of layers, which you'll do before long, often you want it just to work on the one layer, whereas the adjustment layers work on all of them. So, so again, here brightness is still worth looking at, but notice when you increase the brightness, it's doing the whole image, which you may not want. Try reducing the contrast. Sometimes that'll help. But it can just make things a bit washed out. Anyhow, we can always go back to the original. And so there with the exposure, you might tone that down. And gamma is your best friend. You just have to use your eyes to see if it's going to improve things after you adjust the exposure usually. Hue saturation, mainly to get that saturation control, is a really useful one. Lightness can be a bit dangerous because it's going to, again, work in a simulated brightness contrast where it's clamping the colours. But really with those, it's really down to the look you're after. And even the preset, sometimes auto tone can work well, like it has there. And same with auto contrast. There it hasn't done a lot. And auto colour as well could be worth trying there. It's maybe gone very cool because it's assuming that the image is too warm. So I'd probably try and do that manually. So back to the either the photo filters or doing a custom colour, so starting with a pooling filter and then going to here, and you can reduce that. So anyway, you can play with those for days, and then and it's still sometimes worth trying adjustment layers, but again they do work differently, and I know a lot of people who are experienced with Photoshop and use it for a living don't really use adjustment layers all that much, just because they don't like the effect, apparently. But anyway, I do use them once I've got a few more layers in there. And so then the Entourage, I just want to see how that rendering's going. Okay, so the rendering's going. I'm just going to export this one and make sure this time I save it as a PNG. Okay, so back into here, and I'm just going to open that up, and so just go by date. So this one, notice it's automatically cut out the background. So in other words, it's created an alpha channel for the background, and so yeah, really useful. And so I can even just replace the layer in this file, and so there actually adjustment layers might have been handy because I could do the same things, but it doesn't hurt to just get used to making the adjustments manually. So here notice HDR toning won't work, so you need to flatten the image for HDR toning, so I'd have to do that back in the image here. But you can do similar things just by adjusting the exposure, playing with the gamma, and probably the main one's the photo filter. So to get the sky that I want in there, it's fairly easy. You can just open up a image with a background, and so I've got a ton of sky images in that folder. Just open up one that's not too bright. So it might be okay. Don't know. Let's see the perspective. So again, just Control A, Control C, and then choose the layer you want it to go above. Control V, and that'll paste it in. Control T, it's a shortcut for transform, and we can just stretch that the size we want, and probably there, move it up to try and get the perspective to match.
So the PNG of the Revit cuts out the sky already.
Yeah.
That's pretty handy.
Yeah. And it'll even, if you've got reflections on your glass, it'll keep the reflections there in front of the background.
That's pretty handy.
Yeah.
So say that again, so you took it in as a PNG.
Yeah. Yep, and that's it. And it'll do it automatically.
Yeah.
You can do it with TIFFs as well, but it's not as automatic as it is with PNGs. So another really good trick is to render with the people in Photoshop, in Revit. So if you don't know about the Entourage family in Revit, I'll just show you when you go to Component, Load Family, and then in Entourage you have these two RPC families, RPC female and RPC male. I'll just choose one of those. And they each have a few different people built in. So I've got Kathy, Cynthia, Florence, and so on. So I'm going to press space to flip and rotate them. So no, not really. They're a little bit parametric, but you essentially need to buy it's a product that this company called ArcVision sell. And you need to buy the license to be able to do more with them. So you're really stuck with these ones at first. Not really, no. So Kathy, I'm pretty sure is the seated one. So I'll put it over here. I'll get maybe one of the guys. So back to Entourage, male, and they're pretty corporate as well. They're mostly wearing suits and things like that. Yeah, it's all Autodesk stuff. But, yeah. So you can see there what they look like. It's a bit dark. Right, so another option actually, just while I'm doing this, you can go into graphic display options for any view in Revit and adjust the lighting. So I'm going to increase the ambient light there. And that should make it easier for me to see things in the viewport, and that's a useful option for most views.
Will that then affect the rest of
No. So unfortunately she's right behind a post. Let's get her out of there. Go back to the plan. So she can maybe be looking at a window. And so then back into the upstairs perspective. There we are. So it's not Kathy, it must be Cynthia is the seated one. Yeah. So fine tune her position. We've got to go back into the plan again. So you can do all of these things in Photoshop without putting them in Revit, but it just makes it a little bit easier if you've done it this way. So that's not too bad. And so maybe my male could move. I'll have him looking towards the camera. I might try out some of the others as well. So back to here. Not that it really matters. We're going to replace them, you'll see anyway in Photoshop. So I'll leave it with Jay. Okay, so I can just do a really low quality render here. And even on draft. But I'm going to keep it on 300 DPI. So I've got the same pixel dimensions. And that'll give me a chance actually to talk about pixel dimensions in Photoshop. So that sky, you could definitely do more to get the perspective there right. I think it's just a bit too close, unfortunately, as well. Looks too close. Pick it up. Yeah, so it's probably not the right sky. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it could be looking at over the harbour, but you'd want to see maybe, yeah, perspective or something. So, yeah, just try out a different image. And so there are others here. Maybe this one where it's got some obvious perspective is a better one. Yeah.
So there's nothing in Revit that is a outdoor, aside from plants,
What, so
has like a background.
oh, well, you've got the automatic backgrounds, or you can put it. You can put an image in Revit as well.
Yeah, have you seen that?
Yep. So yeah, so you can definitely just here choose image, and then it works in the same way as what I'm doing with Photoshop.
Okay, yeah.
But it's harder to get the placement right in Revit, whereas if you do it afterwards in Photoshop, you can spend more time adjusting the image placement, and also we can adjust that separately. So as long as we do it here under adjustments, I can go and adjust the sky there without affecting the rest of the rendering. So that's usually seen as being a bit easier than the way it works in Revit. And this is the way they do all professional rendering. The background is treated as a separate layer. So it just makes it easier and speeds up the rendering as well. So you can play around with that. And then, okay, so that one I did with the people. Can just set that rendering on. Oh, yep, that's done. So I'm going to export that as. Oh, this one doesn't matter. So I'm just doing this to give me locations of things. And so. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just because otherwise it's surprising how long you have to spend sometimes to get that right.
Yeah. It's kind of just like setting them up.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right, exactly, yeah. And because I've used the same pixel dimensions, I can just copy this all into a new layer in my original file. And so I'll do it on top for now, and then I can just turn that off as I put the people in. So you get sick of them. There are only the 9 in Revit. Yeah, and the one-seated person, whereas you probably want more than that usually. So so just to look at image size. So again, notice it came in exactly. If I've done a different DPI here, it would have maybe not matched up exactly, and you can, but it's good just to have it matching automatically, and that's all because the image size is the same. And so I just sort of show you in Photoshop, when you go to image size, then you can see the width and the height in centimetres, and notice it's not the same as what I had in Revit. So here it's 137 by 100 mil. Photoshop, it's coming in as 42 by 31 centimetres. And the reason is that the resolution's different. So it's resolution, resolution together with width and height, or another way of thinking of it is pixel dimensions combined with width and height give you the resolution. So if I match the resolution, 300 is what I had in Photoshop. Notice it's still not the same. And that's because we've got this other option, resample. So when you've got resample on, it's going to change your pixel dimensions based on the settings you change here. So I'll cancel that and just go back into reset it. And I'll turn resample off this time, and I'll change the resolution this time to 300 again. And notice now that the width and the height match exactly what I had in Revit. So really, what I'm trying to, I suppose, say there is that it's all down to the pixel dimensions. That really is what gives you the quality, the total number of pixels in your image. And it's good to think of an image in that way and not worry so much about the final resolution, except when you need to get it to print out a certain size, and then you should be thinking about how many pixels you need to get that image size to achieve the resolution you're after, which should be 300 dpi. So that's what you're trying to achieve, but then in terms of image size generally, and definitely render times and sizes of image for rendering, you definitely want to have an awareness of your total pixel dimensions, and anything over 1,000 is high generally. But these days for larger images, I mean this is only 13 centimetres. If it was say even just an A4, I know it'd be about 3,000 by 2,000 roughly. And well, I can show you exactly what it would be. It's an easy thing. Here in Revit, we can go size crop. Okay, so an A4 is let's say a little bit less, so it prints within the borders, 28 centimetres or 280 mil on scale. Gives us a height of 205, so that again should be just within the border, and or maybe slightly over, but that's all right. So at 300 dpi, that works out to 3,300 by 2,400 pixels, which is going to take 4 times as long to render as the one that I've just done, because it's more than double the number of pixels in each direction. So that's 4 times the area. And so again, you need to be aware of those things when you render, because that'll tell you why it's taking a long time to render when you end up with large pixel dimensions. So here, 1600 by 1100 is still fairly high, so it took a reasonable time to render, but you just need to be aware if you need to then take it up to A4, allow the rendering time. And if you've got it set up so that it's rendering pretty well, then you can go for it and really increase the size and just let it render overnight. And you'll know that you get a good result in the end. And so then here I'm going to bring in some other images that I've got online. So just make sure you know about these free sites for cutout people, and then you can also search in Google for cutout people and just go to the images. And if you go to the search tools in Google, don't know why that's not coming up. Okay, well, I won't worry about that. Let's see if I refresh it. Doesn't like me. Normally you can click on search tools and increase the image size there, and I wanted to show you that. Don't know why it's not doing it.
About increasing the image size.
You know about that? Yeah. And so it's good there. You'll see the same things for, here we are, size. So if you set it to large, I think that's 1200 and above. So pixel dimensions 1200 in one direction. Or so, oh no, I say lower than 1024. I think is what they use for large. And then, yeah, I'm not sure, but so here 1600 by 1200 is one of the highest settings they've got. You can go higher than that, but you're not going to find very many when you get to these really high sizes. So 2 megapixel, you probably still won't find very many, but you don't need them to be that high with people, because see, it's freezing up there, because it's only part of the image, so it's not the total image size. So 1024 by 768 probably is okay for most of these. And if you go to sites like Immediate Entourage or Mr. Cutout, the people there are fairly high resolution. So I'll just open up one of these and see if we can get one that's standing and not walking. So I'm just middle clicking to bring up tabs.
Is there a page site where you can get free cut-out people?
Yeah, there are a few. Evermotion, I think, do them. Evermotion?
That you have to pay?
Yeah.
Got a pretty good one.
Yeah, well,
Free one,
def- well, I don't know. I mean, depends what your definition of crap is, but I mean, yeah. I mean, have a look in some architectural mags and you'll see the people that they use often aren't any very different to these.
Yeah, like when you kind of do something to refine.
Yeah, I think maybe you're getting the wrong impression about the importance of this sort of graphics in the sort of work that you'd be doing. Because I've seen a lot of professional work where the people are much more basic than this. And they don't obsess over the things that aren't part of the design. So this one has something in there. It's really just to give an impression of scale and the use of the space more than anything. Yes, I wouldn't be getting too hung up on things like people. Materials and lighting, and that's what people pay for. You can definitely pay for a lot for good textures. And Arrowway? Arrowway.
Arrowway?
Yep.
How much is that?
Oh, a few hundred for a texture pack is normal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I've got a few there that I've opened up and I can just download. So they're fairly easy to download. And so here, once you click there, it just opens the image up in Explorer or whatever browser you're using. Connection's very slow. I mean, a few years ago, silhouettes were all the rage, so everyone was doing silhouettes, which was nice because, again, it made the design what people were looking at, but then people started saying they were getting distracted by the silhouettes, and so it's gone back to photos. And it's very slow today. There we go. Okay, so save picture as, and we can save that. I've got a folder in material images called people, where there are people saved already. Okay, so again, Control A, Control C, and so I'm just going to close some of these. Okay, and so then Control V, paste into a new layer, Control T again to scale. So shift, if you don't know, to scale with block proportions. Okay, so this one, luckily, he's right over the top of the other guy, so I could actually use him but without re-rendering, but of course the rendering there is not the best quality. So you need to redo the shadow, and so it's a good chance just to show you quickly how to do the shadows there. So if you just use, I'll just use Magic Wand, and make sure Sample All Layers is turned off.
What was that?
Sample All Layers. Sample all layers when you're using the Magic Wand. If that's turned off, then you can just select easily around the cutout, and then go to Select Inverse, and it'll give you a selection that's the shape of the person. So I can turn the background off now, and then using Control T. Oh, sorry, I'll make a new layer first. And then Control T. I've got to fill it first, sorry. So, annoying, it doesn't let you scale it until you fill the selection with something. So it's going to fill it with black. And then Control T. Then we can scale the scale the shadow shape, and just turn the other layer back on. Oh, sorry, can't until I just finish that. So I'll double click just to finish the transform for the time being, and then I can turn it back on just to check the shadows, and then again just use the transform. So skew is a good one here, and so I can just stretch that. No, it's good, that's why it's good to have the rendered one. It's because it's often a bit misleading if you try and work it out. But the rendering's done, yeah.
Just copy and paste and make it black.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I'll turn it into a multiply in a second, but and you can soften the edges, but usually you don't need to for something like this, because it's going to be fairly faint anyway.
And you just going to turn the quantity down.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to get it so it's coming out under his feet, and then that might do. And then yep, so multiply, and then take the opacity down. Look like that. Might need to still adjust it a bit more, but that's basically the process. So Control D deselects it, so it's a little bit can soften the edges. So you can either use the feathering options or even just the filters. If you blur and that will soften them a bit. And yeah, so you can play with those anyway, and the opacity there maybe if you could come down more. And oops. So if you transform again there, so I can just switch to skew and just bring that across, even though the real shadow is not like this, just because you've got the shadows coming from the column. People are going to think that it should go that way, so I could play with that. Then yeah, it's just a matter of playing with the scaling, and you don't want to get too caught up with shadows. Shame it's not coming from the foot there. Sometimes you can even just paint them in. So if we go and what's happened there? So if you just use the airbrush, and so I can't look on the projector there. Okay, so when you're airbrushing, I'm sure you know about a lot of these things, you can use the square brackets or just increase the size there. increase the hardness. And so painting with black and white, you can just add in, you can just, so you can just do that roughly. It's actually softer usually towards the outside, so if you really want to get them, so it's just totally freezing up here, so I can't really do this, but it thinks I'm clicking, and I'm not. So I'll have to, I think it's just run out of memory. There we go, so luckily Photoshop, you can just go back into history. Anyway, you can play with those forever. And so with that that person though, he needs a bit of adjustment, and this is where actually adjustment layers can be a problem, because it's going to work on all the layers underneath, and we just want to work with him. So yeah, so you can mask it, but yeah, so if you just adjust the individual layer though, it works very well. So that's about it, and then you just want to make sure you flatten it, make it CMYK before you print, and that's about. Oh, definitely, yeah.
Well, yeah, so I don't understand all that.
CMYK.
All that, what does that mean?
Oh, so RGB is what you see on the screen.
Okay.
So red, green, blue are your primaries when you work with a monitor or a projector. You're working with light, but with a printer or anything that uses pigment, you're working with cyan, magenta, yellow as your primaries. So a lot of the colours that you see on the screen don't print. And what you see on the screen is, I mean, you can see here on my monitor, even, it's much brighter than what I've got up there on the projector.
Okay. So returning, so you
you should, yes, yeah, that's right. And so it'll.
you always do that at the end.
Well, you can do it at any stage really, but it's going to increase the file size.
But does that, like, turning it into CM whatever, does that limit you on things on Photoshop?
Yeah, yep, the colours are limited. So here, if you go and change to certain colours, notice you get these warnings, and that's telling you that you've got a colour that won't print. Yeah. So if you click here, that'll take it to a colour that's within gamut.
And when you transform it to CM whatever,
Yep.
is there a way of finding out what changed in that image? Like, is there a way to see all the colours that you can't use that you have been using? No?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have to just look at it and just see what's changed.
Yeah.
That's probably what I want. Because I always get upset when I my perspectives and then it's just like, what's probably the reason why?
Yeah, so it's funny here, that shadow, you probably have to do two shadows to get it right. See, that's what it is. That's why it's looking strange to me. So there, you'd have to do a second shadow. But that's an easy thing actually, once you've done the first one. So I don't know why I don't care too much about things like that. But so it's a simple thing. Once you've done the first shadow, Control C, Control V, Control A, Control C, Control V, there it is. And so that can be then transformed. Let's do the other one. Yeah, that's pretty close to the right angle. Oh no, it's got to come over all. So the perspective tool's a really good one there actually, and yeah, so that's the other one I didn't show you. So perspective, you use that all the time with rendered images, trying to match perspectives. Yep, and that's a great option. So again here that just needs to be set to a multiply, and that's better. That's better. Right, so yep, so that's probably about all you need, more than you need actually for this assignment. And so then always when you do all of that work, you'd want to save this as a Photoshop file, so you can come back and work with the layers. And then just save off a copy. And normally I'd say save it, if you're doing it for printing, as a TIFF. But for the assignment, just save it as a JPEG to bring it back into your Revit file. And so then on your sheets, you can simply insert. So there I have one I inserted earlier. I'll just replace that now. Going to insert, image, find the file, 1A, there we are. So you can just stretch that, put it on the page. And if you want to label it in Revit, on the Annotate tab, you can just draw text. But if you're interested in doing more graphics to your images, have a look at Illustrator, because you only get so far with InDesign, but Illustrator will give you a lot more options, and adjusting the rendering is only a small part of what you do. Then you can do things with line work and shading that you can't do in Photoshop, and so that's another thing to look at. But Photoshop's a great program, you can do a lot with it. But anyhow, that's just the basics. So I'll finish up there.